Hello and welcome to Insight Live, the IT Experts Take. I'm your host, Jason Rader, Insight's Chief Information Security Officer. And today's topic, we're going to be talking about revisiting a topic that we've talked about before. Today's angle is going to be managing technical debt through modernization. And we've got some usual suspects with us and some folks you may not recognize. Let's welcome David McGurty, who is the CTO at Insight Corp with me here. Welcome, David. We got Juan Orlandini, who's our CTO on the Insight Services side. Welcome, Juan.
Good morning. Good afternoon.
And we've got Marcus Benson, who's our National Principal Architect in FinOps for our services organization. Welcome, Marcus. So I like to kick off the blurb that was on the site talking about this. It says 86% of organizations were impacted by technical debt in 2022. Was yours? And we actually had a survey question that I think is worthy of bringing up right off the bat to get the party going. Let me bring that up super quick. Wow. It said, what percentage of your budget is spent supporting tech debts? And the options were 0 to 25, 25 to 50, 50 to 75, and not sure. Funnily, not sure was 40%, and then 25 to 50 was 40%, and 0 to 25 was 20%. And thanks for everybody for filling out that survey. Guys, what do you think about those answers?
No, that I'll go first. That not sure is actually, and unfortunately, not surprising.
I was going to say
because it's actually, and you probably know exactly where I'm headed with this. Tech debt is very insidious in how it manifests itself. It'll pop up in unexpected places. It buries itself in budget lines that you don't expect, maintenance, system upgrades, those kinds of things. So it's not surprising that the overall impact of tech debt is not quantified by most people or a large percentage of the respondents. It is unfortunate, but it is actually part of the conversation that we have with our clients is you probably should be being more meticulous and deliberate about understanding where that is impacting you, how much it's impacting you, and what the true cost of it is for your organization.
And from a cloud perspective, that really doesn't surprise me at all, especially when you're moving those workloads into the cloud. That technical debt really becomes a little bit of a blind spot if you don't have the right processes in place, the right methodologies, the right visibility into your spend. So a lot of those, companies that are unsure, are probably, really just struggling with visibility and not knowing, what's out there and as far as, what's being used effectively and what's waste. And as we know, over 30% of all cloud spend today is waste.
Yeah, actually, you bring up a great point because I think the tech debt, the classic way that we've kind of talked about it only gets exponentially more kind of obfuscated as the cloud comes into the journey based on the way that we've seen the 40% that aren't sure in general. It only makes it more difficult to kind of understand. Is that fair to say, Marcus?
Yeah, absolutely. With the cloud, a lot of customers are making, really quick decisions, maybe forcing them into an IaaS kind of lift and shift scenario, moving workloads, much quicker than they need to or should be moving them. And without the right, optimization, the right assessment analysis of how that workload should actually be architected in the cloud. And that obviously leads to, improper resource sizing, improper configurations, higher cost, and, the right governance, putting in FinOps and the right, provisioning processes can really help to mitigate a lot of that.
So before we get too far deep into this, let's talk about FinOps. Can you give us an overview of that for the folks who that's maybe a term they've heard but don't necessarily understand the distinction?
Yeah, so FinOps is really the cost operating model of the cloud. It's as much a cultural practice as it is a technology practice and a people in process. So it's really more than just, having the right tools, having visibility. You have to have the right folks that are influencing, teams on governance, that are influencing teams on cloud strategy, that are having conversations with workload teams and application teams to know where, there could be training, education gaps, skill gaps when it comes to managing those resources.
I'll put it a little bit more colloquially, and this might help. It's a sister art to DevOps and SRE and platform engineering, which are the common operating models for deploying workload, in that it gives you the financial constructs to make sure that you're doing all of those activities in a fiscally responsible way. So it's just like you have SREs and DevOps teams and platform people that are building all these amazing features and releasing product. If you don't have a team that's taking into account how much it costs, and if you're doing it in the best place for that cost model, you're probably going to end up in a situation where you have to revisit and re-architect or even kibosh a whole project because it's out of budget.
Yeah. And I mean, from a DevOps perspective, if you don't have the right, DevOps practices in place, if you don't have, infrastructure as code best practices and templates that you're providing to your workload teams, you're going to have folks spinning up resources, in the portal without the right governance, without the right pieces in place to manage that, which obviously again leads to an overhead in management, higher costs, remediation efforts, all that, add to that technical debt.
And to tie it back, it becomes exactly that, right? Technical debt, because at some point you're going to have to revisit how do you rebuild this so that it's cost effective, and it might become a bigger problem for you than if you had done it correctly in the first place.
Agreed.
Yeah, and as it relates to financial debt too, I mean, as we're talking through these different topics, financial debt and technical debt, there's different levels of debt. There's good debt, there's bad debt. Just like in finance, technical debt has different levels of interest. You have your high interest debt, you have your low interest debt. If you're lifting and shifting, moving workloads into the cloud in an IaaS fashion, you're creating that high interest debt. Now, modernizing workloads is difficult. It requires some upfront work, some upfront analysis, some upfront investment, but it's going to allow you to create that low interest debt that's going to pay off over time, give you a bigger ROI and a quicker ROI.
Love it. I think, as folks with a lot of us with C's in front of our titles, right? We understand that it's more than the technology aspects. The financial aspects are how we get things done. The greatest technology in the world doesn't matter, if the business doesn't see the return on investment. And part of that is a discipline. I mean, there could be great return on investment, but if you can't report it, if there's no way for you to even show that visibility, I mean, that's one of those things. And I think, David, we're right in the middle of this from an insight perspective right now. It's one of those things where everybody does. They're all behind us wanting to do these great things that we're doing, but we've got to be able to be good stewards of the investments that we're making and be able to provide that back to the business.
Yeah, technical debt, so the good news for everybody on the call is I've yet to be at an organization that doesn't have technical debt. So the people that's like the 20%, you're in a really good spot. I've worked at hyperscalers. I've worked at state government. I was talking to a hyperscaler the other day. Everybody has technical debt. It becomes either a drag on your ability to innovate, or it can be the thing that can help you innovate out into who you want to be. And so I do think of how organizations can both understand their technical debt and turn that problem into opportunity, as well as think about what can organizations do to limit technical debt going forward. And I think in 2023, I think a well-structured organization that's thinking about technology thoughtfully can limit the possibility of future technical debt. It's never going to go away. I mean, there's always going to be changes in technology. Your business is always going to change, but there are solutions and best practices that you can implement today to limit that going forward, which actually is part of solving the problem. If you just keep adding more and more technical debt, the mountain gets too big for you. So you have to be two-phase. How do I reduce my technical debt, and how do I limit future technical debt?
And that brings up a good point too, because there's definitely a cost for not doing anything. The longer you rely on legacy systems in your environment, the more other applications and workloads become dependent on that legacy system, which just becomes this big intertwined mess that you have to unravel and untangle. So.
Yeah, it's a problem across the board for the CIO or the VP of technology or the IT director. I mean, you have the cybersecurity problems, right? You know that firsthand, Jason, with technical debt. You have this cost, this operational cost of both supporting it, running it, and then you have this kind of this aura from your business of why are we running these 10, 20, 30-year-old systems? Why aren't you innovating? So it's a killer on multiple fronts. And if you can take that problem and transition it into modern technology, it's a win across the board. You're investing in the future. You're showing your business units that you're a strategic leader. And three, you're reducing some serious cybersecurity liability.
Yeah, and that brings up another point too. I mean, even if you are a modern organization, maybe a cloud-born organization, you're still accumulating technical debt over time, and it's something that needs to be managed ongoing. Just like FinOps, it's really a cyclical process that doesn't stop. Technical debt's like anti-gravity. If you stop managing it, it's going to go up regardless. So it does require that, ongoing, effort to maintain.
Well, it's an example of, and I think you, David, you touched on it real quickly, is that regardless of what technology stack you end up selecting at any given point in time, at some point down the road, either that technology stack or the best practice on how to use that technology stack is going to mature or cycle out. It's just part of the world that we live in, right? And you have to be conscientious about trying to do as best as you can given the data that you have at the time you make the decisions, but also being aware that down the road you are going to have to make some changes because technology changes, the business changes, the landscape of the world changes, and we have to adapt to it. And that is all technical debt at some point.
Yeah. And I'll bring up another point too around those cloud native organizations too. A lot of those organizations are selling products to their customers that they're supporting with their cloud resources and their cloud spend. If you're not managing your technical debt, that is directly eating into your COGS and your profitability as a company.
We talked a little bit in part one of this, was Carm Wan and I kind of talked about this a while ago. Like, for example, AI. Everybody wants to get into the Gen AI stuff right now. Jumping into a particular angle on that, early adopter, you might be thinking, hey, we're leveraging this latest and greatest technology. Is there, and I'm just kind of bringing up, hey, we jumped into something early, we're leveraging it in a fashion, but what if we jumped into the wrong platform or something along those lines? That becomes tech debt for us. Potentially we're needing to change, to adjust. I'm not saying that's us. I'm just saying in general, those are some of the things that we've got to look out for. Because David, you mentioned if you're doing this in a strategic fashion, you're going to avoid tech debt. What are some of the strategies that people need to think about?
Yeah, so when I'm evaluating technologies, I'm a real believer in this, and maybe I'm alone in this, but when you're selecting technology for your organization, you need to be very thoughtful about a couple of things. One, how is that technology going to mature? Meaning, if it's hardware, is there an opportunity to do it as a service model? So you have optionality in the future to get renewed, better hardware, or maybe even switch technologies. Are you selecting cloud services that have life? But even inside of applications, let's just take application stacks. When I evaluate a kind of a vendor or product going forward, I'm looking, what is their data strategy? Are they building AI into that technology? What does their roadmap look like? How do they even sit in the market? Because if you're acquiring a product for a company and they're not thinking about those things, then they're probably not going to survive. They're not going to be best in class. They're not going to be the innovator, which means you are going to have a major technical debt issue. You're going to have a major platform rebuild coming your way at some point. But if you can be strategic about those and thoughtful about them, you can be very selective and bring the right partners and technology into your organization and limit some of that. You're never going to remove it, but you can definitely limit it, and it changes the game if you're selecting the right partners and products to bring into your organization. I've been in a lot of places, they don't see it that way. It's like they look at the magic quadrant and they say, these are top 4. But you open up the box, they're very different technologies. They're going to different places, and some are more strategic than others. I'm a big believer in that.
I'll tell you one thing that I've always used as a guiding principle is that I don't care what technology you pick, it has a natural life cycle, flat out. I don't care if it's a compute platform, a security platform, a networking platform. They all have a rise, a plateau where they peak, and then there's a demise. It could be sudden or it could be very, very gradual. Either way, there is always going to be a process that you have to plan for to be able to extract that technology out of your systems so that you can continue to do operations. And so I've been doing this for a long time. You can tell that from my gray hair and lack of it up here. All right. But at one point, I installed and sold Sun Solaris systems all over the world, and everybody thought that that was going to be the bomb. That's the one thing that's going to survive everything. Well, where are they now, right? And the same thing with VMS, VAX, and VMS, and I mean, it's gone, right? And there's all these, and there's lots and lots of these examples. And at the time, they were the right answer. They were 100% the right decision to make. But very few people actually thought about is how am I going to get my data out of that thing when the next thing comes up, because that thing is going to age out. And that is technical debt, that 100% technical debt.
And modernizing to the cloud has kind of created a variation of that, where, things change in the cloud so fast. There's always new services coming up. There's changes to services, to pricing models, to sizes that are available, SKUs that are available, chipsets that are available. It's hard to keep up. And, it's one of those things that even if you are modernizing to PaaS and cloud native workloads, you do have to keep an eye on those changes and, those updates to those services. And I'll give an example. I was working with a very, very large Azure customer that was spending a ton of money in Cosmos DB, tens of millions of dollars a year in Cosmos DB. They had created most of their Cosmos DB resources in the cloud about 3 years back to support some customers. Well, Cosmos DB, Microsoft, the smallest size for an auto-scale Cosmos DB resource used to be 400 to 4,000 RUs. Well, 2 years ago, Microsoft changed that and allowed you to go down to a 100 to 1,000 size RU auto-scale set. This customer didn't know that, and they had been running for the last 3 years almost all of their resources in a 400 to 4,000 size Cosmos DB, where they hadn't even hit the minimum RU threshold of 400 on any of those resources in the past. I think we evaluated the last 12 months. So all of those resources that were set up as auto scale 400 to 4,000 weren't even scaling past 400. And they could have downsized all of those to 100 or 1,000 and saved 75% of their costs if they had been paying attention to those updates to that product.
I'm sure that's not a unique story either. That's probably happened a lot. I think you kind of bring up two questions here. One, what's a good horizon? I mean, I know the standard answer is going to be, well, it depends. But what's a good horizon to think about planning? Is it 3 years out? Is it 12 months out? I mean, because folks who bet against the GPT craze 2 years ago and are probably definitely feeling some tech debt right now. Do you know what I'm saying? The folks that were going all in on AI and developing their own LLMs and those kinds of things. What's a good horizon to look at for that?
Yeah, I think there's kind of two different answers. One that's more from that legacy data center perspective, where you're deprecating hardware over time, versus this new model, which is a subscription model, which in my opinion requires a lot more of a consistent touch point and consistent management, consistent, visibility and monitoring of that spend. So.
It's definitely.
It does seem like
It's definitely not 5 years anymore, Jason. When I got,
I remember you said, "What's your 5-year plan?" That's so ridiculous.
It's not 5 years anymore. I think your time horizon is 2 years. You need to have a good technology roadmap. You need a good technology architecture. You need to have selected a couple of core platforms to build around, and then you need to modernize that And you also need to, for the 40% in our study, you need to know what your technical debt is, because that's all cyber risk. That's your future budget ask. Like that is what you should be uncovering right now, because that's where you need to be focusing some of your time and attention, right? I found a lot of department-wide applications that were running under people's desk, and I seem to always find them. It's like you need to get them out from people's desks into a modern architecture. It's a funny example, but it's true across the board. If you have a data center that you're propping up the door and putting a fan on it, like you need to deal with that technical debt, right? Like I see the same trends over and over and over again. But it's definitely in the probably the 2-year time cycle. You need to be revisiting stuff nowadays.
I'll tell you, it's one of the things that we do for our clients is we help them with data center relocations, whether it's from one data center to another, or from data center to cloud, or cloud to cloud. We help across all of those things, right? And David's comment around finding workloads that are sitting underneath a desk struck a chord, because in almost every environment that we go do these engagements at, there is some sort of something that is sitting on a desk, under a desk, beside a desk, and that is critical to that business's function, and nobody knows about it. It's invariable. That happens every time, and that is, oh my gosh, that's unrecognized debt at its primus.
Now, I found it interesting that 40% aren't sure, what level of technical debt and how much time they spend managing that. Now, I wonder if that's partly because, we see a lot of movement in the C-levels and at that leadership level in IT. And I mean, David, I know you just went through this, but say you step into a new leadership role for an organization, how do you kind of adjust and monitor and manage that accumulated technical debt that you're taking over?
Yeah, it's incredibly hard, and a lot of it gets lost with budget cuts. So this technical debt was on someone's board at some time in the past, and it got cut out of the budget because it just wasn't strategic anymore. They needed to find some cut, and so you can't even see it. So I think it's required that you have to both have people inside the organization. I call them librarians. So these people inside of every organization that know about all this different technology, and you go ask them, oh, it's like it's under the desk over here. You need that. But more importantly, you need really high quality tool sets and partners that can both discover it and offer options. It's required. Like just as an example, I worked at the state of Colorado. The state was so agitated they couldn't get a good answer on technical debt. They wrote a bill that basically required the state, my department, to report on it yearly and bring in tools and technology to both find it and resolve it. Like when I joined, they were literally doing a count on PCs and servers by hand. Like that is not a recipe for success in my view. It's just my view, but I don't think it's a recipe for success.
Great point. The other question I said I had 2 questions earlier. The other one, and this is as good a time as any to kind of talk about it, is, from a CTO perspective, or just from a decision leadership perspective, we think of kind of like IT or certain parts of the organization making these calls. And I don't think, even though maybe the buck stops at a certain place from a technology perspective, but what I've seen operate here at Insight with what I've watched you do, David, and what I know we do with our clients is we try to get it as the way that these strategies work is when it's not one person's strategy, when it's the organization's strategy. Anybody want to make a comment related to that? It's not like we want to pick the technology that everybody's going to use. We want them to help us pick it, right?
I'm going to answer that one in a slightly different context than you might have originally envisioned.
Okay.
And I'm going to tie it back to this question around AI that you brought up, right? And because that's actually top of mind for everybody, right? Every conversation I have with a client starts with AI, ends with AI. And the guiding principle is really what they should be looking for, is what is my guiding principle to leverage these technologies, not the very specific technology itself. So if you think about what AI is doing and the transformation that it's going through and the rapid pace of innovation in there, any choice, I don't care how well founded it is that you have, is probably going to be the wrong choice sooner than later if you don't maintain it and make sure that it stays current. You're leveraging the latest innovations. The important part is, how do you incorporate that into your organization and make sure that your organization is ready to adopt all that change, right? If you have the right frameworks around that change, then the specific of technology is important, but is not nearly as relevant in the decision-making process.
Well said.
And I would say it slightly different as well. Like what are the causes of tech debt in organizations? Like, we haven't really talked about that yet, but typically it's shadow IT that gets handed off, right? That's one form of tech debt. There is lack of funding, meaning, we built this, but we never really funded it, or we cut funding for it. Or maybe there's just some transformational shift, which you both just touched on, but something like AI or something that just turns what you have into technical debt. It's not as useful anymore. And like, understanding what those causes are, like, they don't directly translate into how to solve them, right? Shadow IT saying, oh, by the way, we don't want to manage this. The reason why IT and technology departments deal with this is because it becomes risk to the organization. It becomes financial risk, it becomes cyber risk. It becomes now the responsibility of someone to resolve this kind of going forward. But understanding where it comes from, you can now start to attack it at its source, right? Like, let's not have underfunded projects create more tech debt. Let's use our CISOs to stop. Shadow IT can be good, so I don't want to completely knock it. It exists for a reason, but in 2023, there has to be an acknowledgement that creating technology out there that's not supervised and run and planned for creates an untenable amount of risk for an organization, especially if you're in finance or like really anything where you got customer data or PHI or HIPAA. Like, it's completely untenable. So organizations being able to run wild the way they did in the 80s with spinning up computer systems, that day is past, and the sooner organizations can get their head around it and implementing processes and technologies and budgets to both prevent it as well as get rid of it, I think it's imperative today. I'd love your comments on that, Jason, because you live with the cyber issues on a day-to-day basis, right?
I gave you you're my brother, is the things that you're saying are exactly right. I hate to be the only guy saying them. So again, we're definitely partners in crime in what we're trying to accomplish. And it's for the same reasons, to be honest. I mean, I don't want security for security's sake. I want the business to be able to embrace the latest and greatest. We just want to be aware of it. People are great at acquiring things. To Marcus's earlier point, they're great at going to the cloud and getting in there and getting that thing, but operationalizing it and maintaining it and patching it and understanding the types of data and being able to report that back from a risk perspective aren't necessarily what innovative people are super great at. And that's the kind of governance and program that needs to be in place, even more so when the perimeter of the organization isn't the classic one that we're used to dealing with. So 1000%. And I think, people don't realize, even if something was great today, shadow IT, we did this, it was a marketing thing, it was cool, we're doing this in the cloud. All of a sudden, a regulation gets passed in California or Germany or whatever, and that totally changes the way that we can manage something like that. And without understanding that, definitely some risk exposure for the organization. And Juan, another thing I'm sure you'll nod heavily to, those things that operate under somebody's desk, although benign, even if it's totally secure, it only does this or that. The risk from an availability perspective, when we got all the king's horses and all the king's men have to get together to put Humpty Dumpty back, if that whole business continuity's probably been overlooked as well for that, and rebuilding something that you have no idea how it works is a tragedy in most cases.
Oh, so you hit a personal hot spot.
I knew I was.
Because BCDR is a lot more than just a set of technologies, right? And you'll hear data protection vendors say, "Hey, I'm your BCDR technology," and you'll hear storage replication and cloud sellers tell you that this is how you do BCDR, and that's not it at all. BCDR actually starts by looking at the business processes themselves and understanding what risks you have in the organization and how you're going to recover from those risks. Now, those risks could manifest themselves through a cyber attack, through a event outside of your control, like a fire or an earthquake or a tornado or one of those things, a natural disaster. There's lots and lots of different things. Most people's reaction to that is like, well, I have backup and I have replication. That's cool. But do you know if you even have the right systems to bring that stuff back up? Do you know if you even have the right people with the right skills to bring that back up? Do you have even the right documentation so you know what sequencing of things to bring back up in what order so that the business can continue?
Does the software even exist anymore?
Oh my gosh. Scrambling for an ISO for something that was last shipped in 2004, you'd be amazed at how many times that ends up happening, because that's technical debt that people are just shoving down and they're like kicking the can, and it goes unidentified because the BCDR plan does not actually incorporate that kind of holistic understanding of the environment, which is what David was talking about, right? Drives me bananas that still is a thing, but it is not cheap. It's not effective. It's not fun. Let me tell you, building BCDR plans, participating in all that is painful, because you have to really truly understand each and every eventuality and all of the components that are associated with it. So it's a personal passion.
I knew I was pushing that button. And kind of to turn things back to kind of Marcus's angle, I think, first of all, a lot of things we've talked about get better once we've moved to the cloud to a degree, assuming we've done it properly. I also think, some of the things that you might get locked into, to your earlier point, Marcus, where Microsoft sold the Cosmos DB at a certain point and then they changed it a little bit later, that actually potentially helps you from a tech debt perspective, because now it's cheaper. And I know you already said that, but I think that's one of the flexibilities you get with those platforms that can kind of change, and you could leverage them like that. So again, another kind of affirmation that moving towards that type of thing gives you a little more flexibility than the classic way of putting something in your data center, getting locked into it from a hardware and software perspective.
Yeah, and I mean, vendor lock-in can come in the cloud as well.
Sure.
If you aren't evaluating the right place for your workload to land, not every cloud provider runs the same workloads for the same price, then you could be accumulating technical debt as well by just not evaluating and looking at other areas to land that workload.
Well, so how do we wrap this up? I think we've brought up some interesting things. I mean, I love the passionate BCDR thing, because it needs to be said. I love the risk angle to this whole thing, because some folks think, oh, we're sweating these resources. This is how we leverage this stuff. But there's that whole, well, we're getting left behind from a tech perspective. We're creating more risk to our organization. How do we bring this stuff back up? And then I think there's the whole, sometimes tech debt is not what you've got, but what you don't have, because you haven't gone to the latest tech. Security is a great example of that. I mean, some of the latest security controls that are out there give you, with AI built in, and give you a lot of, intelligence and capability that isn't possible with previous platforms. What would you guys, I think let's all kind of give our, we all have kind of different angles on this. Let's give our kind of pep talk to the folks out there on where to start or what to do.
So I'll start it off, because I like doing that. I'll say this, all right? Technical debt is something that you need to just be completely mindful of. It is, to David's point, Marcus's point, it is absolutely going to happen. You can't avoid it, but you can be smart about understanding that it is going to happen and how you plan for that. And that's the real message behind all of this, despite all of the different ugly warts that manifest itself through it. You can plan for it and you can budget for it. And if you manage it just like you manage your financial debt, you can actually leverage it to your advantage 100%.
Love it.
Yeah, and from a FinOps standpoint, if you're migrating into the cloud, modernize your workloads first and foremost. Make sure that you are, when you are taking on that technical debt, you're taking on that good debt, that low interest debt. And then once you move it in the cloud, make sure you're investing in FinOps, because cloud spend, regardless of the types of workloads that you're consuming, requires constant management, visibility, optimization, and eyes on it at all times, really. So.
Yeah, I'll give a couple of recommendations. I would say the first thing I talked about before, stop the bleeding. Like, build yourself a good technology architecture, bring in good people underneath you that can make strategic decisions to limit technical debt going forward. You're not going to stop it, but limit it. Next thing is open up your budget. See how much of your budget is going to maintaining systems and processes that are not adding strategic value to. This is the number one thing for CIOs, is they're spending too much money on things that they're never going to be able to innovate with. And if they can make that pivot to moving those to modern architectures, modern security practices, modern applications, it's going to help quite a bit. And then finally, partner with your CISO. It is absolutely required in this day and age that the vice president of technology, IT director, partners with the CISO. It's the absolute best way to both protect your data as well as get it money to remove technical debt, because cybersecurity is in the news every single day. It's real. It's legitimate. If you haven't been able to get funding for replacing that mainframe or that old desktop, the single best way is through your CISO's office, right? Because look, you can't have that there, right? And we need to solve for this. So those are some things you can do today. And then finally, I'll say, you can do it. There are tools and technologies for removing the hardest to remove technical debt out there. I think there's 5 different ways to get off of a mainframe now. 10 years ago, that absolutely was not true. Virtualization, containerization, cloud, like the tools and technology, the partners are out there to do it. You can do it. You just got to have a dedicated mindset to get it done.
Love it. No, and I'll echo your comments. I think, we get so much done in that collaborative way that we do things. I think that's definitely something and that's across the board on our client-facing services side as well as our internal side. We get so much done because we're working together as opposed to separate compartmentalized parts of the organization. And I think that's a key element in success here. And I love, most of the clients that we talk to right now, budgets aren't wide open. It's not like, hey, let's do whatever the cool, innovative thing is right now. It's, hey, we're going to have to take stuff out in order to put stuff in. I think Marcus's earlier point is a brilliant example of, hey, we're spending 75% more than we should have. We should be paying attention to this stuff. That's how you fund a lot of innovation within the organization. So I think, again, focusing, partner with finance, partner with the parts of the organization, I think is a great example. And I love you can do it, because you can. And again, that's where folks like Insight, folks like us are here to give you examples of how we've helped folks do it, thought leadership, those kinds of things. And if you want to know more about that, please visit us at insight.com. And thanks for joining us. Thanks, gentlemen. It's been fun.
It has been great fun. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Cheers.